It has been 3 standard cycles since Chief Xenobiologist Rix submitted his final report and retreated to the outer colonies. His departure created a vacuum in our xenobiological department that I have reluctantly filled. Initially, I dismissed his assessments of humans as hyperbolic, the paranoid conclusions of a mind that had spent too long fixated on a single species. I was wrong. My first personal encounter with humans came during the joint scientific expedition to the quantum anomaly, in the Cygnus Void. Our team included representatives from 7 council species, each selected for specialized knowledge. The humans sent only 2, Dr. Eleanor Chen, quantum physicist, and Commander Samuel Okafor, expedition security. I remember my dismissive thought upon meeting them. Such unimpressive physical specimens. No protective exoskeletons, no enhanced sensory organs, nothing to distinguish them from primitive planetary species. Their technological adaptations, their environmental suits and equipment, seemed clumsy compared to our biologically integrated systems. The anomaly expedition changed everything. I thought I understood about predatory adaptation. When our research vessel experienced catastrophic drive failure near the anomaly's event horizon, the established emergency protocol was clear. Abandon ship. Retreat to safe distance and escape. Pods. Wait for rescue. Every species represented followed this logical approach, except the humans. Dr. Chen and Commander Okafor remained aboard, despite the ship's AI calculating 94% probability of complete structural failure. The data is too valuable to lose, Chen explained through the communication channel, her voice displaying none of the stress markers I expected. We'll stabilize the core and transmit what we have. What followed was a masterclass in improvised problem-solving that defied biological explanation. Working in an irradiated environment that was actively destroying their cellular structure, the 2 humans reconfigured the ship's failing drive system into a makeshift stability field. They didn't just save themselves. They preserved the ship, the research, and provided data on the anomaly that would have taken decades to recollect. Later, in the medical bay where they were being treated for radiation exposure that would have killed most species, I asked Commander Okafor why they had taken such an irrational risk. History is full of one-way missions, he said, wincing as regenerative therapy repaired his damaged tissues. Someone has to be willing to stay behind. But there was no logical reason to believe you could succeed, I countered. Dr. Chen's response haunts me still. The absence of a known solution doesn't mean a solution doesn't exist. This mindset, this rejection of impossibility, is what Rix was trying to warn us about. Humans don't accept limitations as fixed. They treat them as puzzles, as challenges to overcome, rather than boundaries to respect. In most species, this would be considered a psychological defect, a dangerous disconnection from reality. In humans, it's their greatest evolutionary advantage. I now understand why Rix classified them not merely as predators, but as extinction, itself evolved into conscious form. They refused the most fundamental law of biology, that species must adapt to their environment or perish. Humans have decided there is a third option: make the environment adapt to them instead. Even more concerning, they appear to be transforming our own species through proximity. After our return from the anomaly expedition, I discovered myself approaching problems differently, asking human-like questions. What if we tried? Instead of, this cannot be done because we are being changed by contact with them. And I'm not certain we're equipped to recognize how profound that change might be. The Council must acknowledge the reality of what we face. Humans are not simply another member species of the galactic community. They are a transformative force that will ultimately reshape that community in ways we cannot predict or control. In my first official report as Chief Xenobiologist, I strongly urge the Council to establish a specialized division dedicated solely to understanding human cognitive adaptation. We must study not just what they do, but how they think, before their thought patterns become indistinguishable from our own. The Council has approved limited funding for what they've termed the Human Observation Initiative, though they've rejected my recommendation for quarantine protocols. Their reasoning remains consistent. Humans have shown no direct aggression toward Council species. Their territorial expansion remains confined to previously unclaimed systems, and their technology exchanges have benefited multiple civilizations. Fear, we are missing the existential threat beneath these apparently peaceful interactions. Today, I witnessed a demonstration of human educational methods during an interspecies knowledge exchange. The humans have established learning centers throughout council space where species can study various disciplines under human instruction. These centers have become remarkably popular, with waiting periods often extending to multiple cycles. I observed a class on creative problem solving, led by a human instructor named Professor Maya Lindholm. The students included Tresky, Vexillians, Floraxians, and even a pair of Krell, species with fundamentally different cognitive architectures and evolutionary backgrounds. Professor Lindholm began with what she called a thought experiment, a fabricated scenario designed to stimulate problem-solving pathways. She described a situation where students were trapped in a sealed room with only common objects available, challenging them to find escape methods. What followed was the most subtle form of predation I have ever witnessed. The professor didn't hunt their bodies. She hunted their minds. She systematically dismantled their established thought patterns, challenging assumptions, redirecting neural pathways, and reconstructing their approach to obstacles. She used questions as weapons, metaphors as traps, and approval as bait. By the session's end, every student, regardless of species, was exhibiting distinctly human thought patterns, approaching problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously, considering improbable solutions seriously, and most disturbingly, displaying the uniquely human trait of treating failure as information rather than as an endpoint. Constraints are where creativity happens, Professor Lindholm told the class. The more limited your resources, the more interesting your solutions become. This perspective reversal, treating limitation as opportunity rather than obstacle, represents a fundamental cognitive shift for most council species. Traditional evolutionary adaptation teaches organisms to work within constraints or perish. Humans have developed the ability to psychologically reframe constraints themselves as evolutionary advantages. After the class, I approached Professor Lindholm with my concerns, carefully framing them as academic interest rather than alarm. "Aren't you concerned about fundamentally altering how other species think?" I asked. "These cognitive patterns evolved over millions of years for specific evolutionary contexts." Her response was telling. "Knowledge isn't colonization, Dr. Tev. We're not replacing their thinking. We're expanding it. Every species benefits from more tools in their cognitive toolkit. But this misses the critical point. These aren't just tools. They're complete cognitive frameworks that, once adopted, fundamentally transform how a species perceives reality. And these frameworks inevitably lead to human-like approaches and human-like conclusions. Most concerning of all, the students were embracing this transformation eagerly, even joyfully. They didn't feel hunted or colonized. They felt liberated. In my secure communication to the council, I emphasized that humans have discovered the most effective form of species dominance ever observed in our galaxy. They make other species want to become more like them. Not through force, not through biological manipulation, but through the simple, predatory act of presenting their cognitive patterns as superior alternatives to our own. And the most unsettling part? From an objective, evolutionary perspective, they may be right. The Human Containment Committee has been quietly dissolved by council vote. My warnings about cognitive infiltration were dismissed as speculative and lacking empirical foundation. Council President Jun even suggested I might be suffering from prolonged xenobiological stress and recommended a recovery period on my homeworld. I will not be silenced so easily. Today, I witnessed humans deploy what may be their most dangerous adaptation yet. Their unique capacity for empathy as a predatory tool. The incident occurred during diplomatic negotiations over the disputed Tannhauser sector, where resource-rich planets sit at the intersection of three species' territorial claims: the Krell hegemony, the Vexillian consortium, and humanity's united Earth government. By all traditional metrics, humans entered these negotiations at a disadvantage. The Krell brought overwhelming military presence. The Vexillians leveraged their control of adjacent trade routes. Humans had only minor colonies in the region and limited strategic positioning. The human diplomatic team was led by Ambassador Lucia Ortega, a seemingly unremarkable individual with no obvious augmentations or enhancements. What transpired over the next 6 days demonstrated why Rix believed humans to be extinction incarnate. Unlike most species who approach negotiations from positions of self-interest, Ambassador Ortega began by deeply immersing herself in understanding the cultural frameworks of both other species. She memorized Krell honor protocols and Vexillian trade rituals not as academic exercises, but with a level of intuitive comprehension that unnerved me. During the third day of talks, she presented a proposal framed entirely in Krell ritualistic language when addressing their representatives, then seamlessly switched to utilizing Vexillian metaphorical trade speech for their delegation. She didn't merely translate human concepts, she reconceptualized the entire diplomatic approach within the cognitive frameworks of the species she addressed. She's mirroring them, my assistant observed. No, I corrected. Mirrors merely reflect. She's transforming herself into the ideal negotiating partner for each species simultaneously. This is what Rix missed in his predator analysis. Human. Empathy isn't merely a social bonding mechanism. It's a form of temporary self-transformation that allows them to become whatever they need to be in any given context. They don't just understand other minds, they can temporarily become other minds, without losing their core human identity and objectives. The results were predictable, yet still shocking. Within 6 days, both the Krell and Vexillians had agreed to human-favorable terms, each believing they had secured the best possible outcome. More disturbing still, both delegations left with genuine positive regard for humanity, with several members establishing what they considered personal connections with the human representatives. He confronted Ambassador Ortega afterward, unable to contain my scientific curiosity. Your species has developed empathy into a weapon, I stated. She seemed genuinely surprised. That's a rather hostile interpretation, Dr. Tev. Empathy isn't about gaining advantage. It's about connection. Connection that invariably benefits humans, I noted. Her response was illuminating. Good diplomacy benefits everyone. If we understand what matters to the Krell and Vexillians, and ensure they get it, while also achieving our objectives, that's not predation. It's mutually beneficial cooperation. This perfectly encapsulates the danger humans represent. They don't see themselves as predators. They genuinely believe in their cooperative intentions, even as they systematically reshape galactic society to reflect human values, human thought, patterns, and human objectives. Empathy allows humans to understand what other species desire, then help them achieve watered-down versions of those desires while advancing human interests. Since other species receive some benefits, they perceive the relationship as cooperative rather than predatory. By the time they realize how completely their original objectives have been transformed by human influence, they've already been incorporated into human-centric systems from which extraction becomes nearly impossible. The most dangerous predator isn't one that sees itself as a hunter, but one that genuinely believes itself to be a friend, while systematically consuming your autonomy. In my classified report, I've used a term that will likely trigger further dismissal from the Council. Mimetic predation. Humans don't just hunt bodies or resources, they hunt minds. They spread their thought patterns like contagions, transforming other species from within through cognitive infection rather than physical confrontation. The Council reacted as expected, calling my conclusions alarmist and anthropophobic. They've reduced funding for the Human Observation Initiative by 70%. President June has suggested I take extended leave. I cannot. The evidence grows clearer each day. We are facing something unprecedented in galactic history. Not conquest in the traditional sense, but something far more insidious. A complete reimagining of galactic civilization with humanity at its ideological center. And the most terrifying part? Many of us are beginning to think this might be for the best. I must record these observations quickly. My position has become precarious as support for my research diminishes. The Human Diplomatic Office has filed a formal complaint alleging my studies constitute species-based discrimination and promote unfounded xenophobic narratives. The Council has scheduled a review of my status next cycle. Despite these obstacles, I've continued monitoring human expansion patterns throughout Council space. What I've discovered confirms my worst fears about their unique form of predation. Unlike traditional territorial species who establish clear boundaries and defend them aggressively, humans practice what I term cultural permeation. They insert themselves into existing structures and transform them from within. Consider the following patterns. Human medical technologies have been adopted by 92% of Council medical facilities within the past 3 cycles. These technologies are provided through open-source frameworks that encourage adaptation and modification. On the surface, this appears generous. The reality is more calculated. These systems subtly reshape medical practice across species toward human methodologies and priorities. Human entertainment has experienced explosive popularity across species barriers. Their immersive narrative structures activate pleasure centers even in species with radically different neurological architectures. These narratives invariably center human perspectives, human ethical frameworks, and human approaches to conflict resolution. Human educational institutions now host students from 1,289 non-human worlds. These students return to their home planets as carriers of human cognitive patterns, human problem-solving approaches, and human cultural values. The vast majority report positive experiences and advocate for greater integration with human systems. The human language, Standard English, has become the de facto second language of interspecies commerce, despite the existence of council translation technologies. Species who adapt to human linguistic patterns inevitably begin adopting human, conceptual frameworks embedded within language structures. This isn't traditional colonization. It's something far more sophisticated, an entirely new form of species-level predation that doesn't require violence, coercion, or even intentional dominance. Humans simply make themselves useful, interesting, and central. By the time other species realize how dependent they've become on human frameworks, extraction becomes nearly impossible without significant societal disruption. I witnessed the perfect example of this strategy during the recent pandemic outbreak among the Tresky colonies in the Andlor system. A highly specialized pathogen had evolved to target Tresky neural tissue, causing widespread mortality. The Galactic Medical Authority estimated development of an effective treatment would require at least 8 standard cycles. Humans from the nearby research station at New Helsinki volunteered assistance. Despite having minimal previous exposure to Tresky biology, they approached the problem with their typical disregard for established limitations. "We don't need to understand everything about Tresky neurology," explained Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the human medical lead. "We just need to understand enough about the pathogen's mechanism to disrupt it." Within 30 standard days, the human team had developed a treatment that reduced mortality by 87%. The remaining Tresky populations embraced human medical practices almost immediately, abandoning centuries of established healing traditions in favor of human methodologies that demonstrably saved lives. Can this be called predation when it results in saved lives? This is the moral complexity that makes human expansion so difficult to counter. They genuinely help other species while simultaneously making them more human-like and more dependent on human systems. After the Tresky intervention, I confronted Dr. Tanaka with my concerns about cultural replacement. "We didn't ask them to adopt our entire medical philosophy," he argued. "We offered a solution to an immediate problem. But the solution carries embedded human assumptions about medicine, ethics, and biological intervention," I countered. "You've replaced their entire approach to healing." His response haunts me. "If your culture can't survive contact with better ideas, the problem isn't with the ideas." This represents the core of human predatory philosophy. They genuinely believe other species should want to become more like them, not through force, but through free choice. And when faced with human medicine that saves lives, human technology that solves problems, and human entertainment that brings pleasure, many species are making exactly that choice. The Council must recognize this pattern before it's too late. This isn't about preventing human aggression. It's about preserving the diverse cognitive and cultural frameworks that comprise galactic civilization before they're all subtly transformed into variations of human thought systems. My time grows short. The Council review looms, and I've received disturbing reports that several of my research assistants have been approached by human academic institutions with offers of positions and funding. The hunters have noticed they're being observed and are responding with typical human ingenuity. I fear the next chief xenobiologist may view humanity through a lens already shaped by human influence. My position has been officially reorganized. The Council claimed the decision was unrelated to my human research, but the timing speaks for itself. My replacement, Dr. Scholl, has already redirected department resources toward what he calls cooperative xenobiological initiatives with prominent human research institutions. The infection spreads. I continue my observations independently, though resources are limited. Today I witnessed perhaps the most disturbing demonstration yet of human predatory adaptation, their unique approach to conflict. The incident occurred in the disputed Sagan's Reach, where independent mining operations had discovered significant element zero deposits. 3 species had established competing claims: the Drell Consortium, the Vexillian Mining Authority, and a small human operation called Frontier Resources Limited. When negotiations failed, the Drell deployed military assets to secure their claim, by force, a traditional and expected approach to resource disputes outside council jurisdiction. The Vexillians responded by establishing a naval blockade. The humans did something unprecedented. Rather than engaging in direct military confrontation, where they were clearly outmatched, they deployed what they termed asymmetric solutions. First, they released comprehensive geological surveys showing the element zero deposits extended far beyond the disputed region, with highest concentrations actually outside the areas the Drell had occupied. Simultaneously, they proposed a novel extraction method that could increase yield by 340% through cooperative development, publicly releasing the technical specifications as a demonstration of good faith. "There's enough for everyone," announced Frontier Resources Director Maya Chen in a public statement. "Why fight over scraps when we can feast together?" The Drell commander, faced with evidence that he had deployed military assets to secure an inferior position, withdrew to the more valuable coordinates. The Vexillians, seeing potential for greater profit through cooperation than exclusion, lifted their blockade and entered preliminary partnership discussions. Within 20 standard days, all 3 species were cooperatively developing the region with human extraction technology, with profits divided through a complex but remarkably equitable formula developed by human economists. This represents what I term predation by reframing. When faced with conflict, humans rarely engage on the terms their opponents establish. Instead, they systematically transform the nature of the conflict itself until previous approaches become irrelevant or counterproductive. Most species enter conflicts with clear objectives and established methodologies. Humans treat both as malleable variables. They don't just adapt their tactics to the situation. They adapt the situation to create entirely new tactical landscapes that favor their unique cognitive advantages. I interviewed Director Chen afterward, presenting as a neutral academic researcher. "The Drell were prepared to kill for those resources," I noted. "You were severely outgunned. Most would consider your position hopeless." She smiled in that distinctive human way that suggests both amusement and predatory calculation. "History is filled with conflicts where the militarily superior force lost because they were fighting the wrong war." "And what war were you fighting?" I asked. "We weren't fighting a war at all," she replied. "We were building a marketplace." This capacity to conceptually transform the nature of interactions, from conflict to cooperation, from zero-sum to positive-sum, represents an evolutionary adaptation so powerful it renders traditional species-level competition obsolete. How can you defend against a predator that transforms you into a partner? More concerning still, I've noticed other species beginning to adopt this approach. The Vexillians, historically rigid in their hierarchical negotiating structures, have started implementing human-style lateral thinking in their diplomatic core. The Drell, known for direct military approaches, have established what they call strategic reframing divisions, modeled directly on human conflict resolution methodologies. The cognitive infection spreads, transmitted through demonstrated success, rather than coercion. In my independent analysis, distributed through encrypted channels to remaining allies, I've emphasized the existential nature of this threat. We aren't facing human domination through traditional means. We're experiencing something far more profound: the gradual replacement of diverse species-level cognitive frameworks with variations of human thought patterns. The irony is painful. By the time most species recognize the threat, they've already become too human-like in their thinking to perceive it as threatening. They've adopted human perspectives on efficiency, progress, and cooperation that make human-led initiatives appear not just beneficial, but inevitable. This is the true mastery of humanity's evolutionary path. They don't need us to surrender to them. They simply need us to start thinking like them. Once that transformation occurs, we choose to become more like them willingly, perception by perception, decision by decision, until distinction itself becomes meaningless. And through it, all they genuinely believe they're helping us. This may be my final log. Funding for independent research has dried up as academic institutions throughout council space increasingly align with human collaborative frameworks. My warnings are now routinely dismissed as reactionary and resistant to productive cross-species exchange. The humans have a term I've only recently come to fully understand: checkmate. The Helios incident was the final piece that secured their position. When the ancient star began its catastrophic collapse, threatening multiple settled worlds across several species, the Council implemented traditional evacuation procedures, triage protocols developed over centuries for managing large-scale disasters. Humans rejected these protocols as unacceptable and deployed experimental stellar stabilization technology they had apparently developed despite having no historical need for such systems. The success of their intervention saved billions of lives across multiple species. In the aftermath, I confronted Admiral Helena Chen of the Human Expeditionary Force with the question that had haunted me since witnessing their response. Why commit such resources to primarily non-human worlds? I asked. Her answer revealed the final, terrible truth I had been approaching. Because we can. This simple response encapsulates what makes humans fundamentally different from other sentient predators. When faced with others' suffering, most predatory species ask, "How does this affect me? What advantage can I gain?" Humans ask themselves, "Can we help? And if so, are we obligated to?" Their moral framework, this bizarre evolutionary adaptation that compels them to extend protection and resources to beings with whom they share no genetic relationship, has proven to be the ultimate predatory adaptation in an interconnected galactic community. We never stood a chance. In the cycles since the Helios incident, humanity's position in galactic society has undergone a fundamental transformation. Species that once viewed them with suspicion now actively seek human partnerships, human protection, and human guidance. The Council itself has voted to incorporate human representatives into its governing structure, the first non-founding species ever granted such status. Most telling of all, other predatory species now modify their behaviors in human presence. The Krell no longer conduct ritual combat exhibitions when humans attend diplomatic functions. The Drell have abandoned traditional territorial expansion practices in favor of what they call sustainable development frameworks, a concept directly imported from human philosophical traditions. We are all becoming more human, not through conquest, not through force, but through the simple, inexorable pressure of demonstrated success. In what may be my final official communication, I must acknowledge what both Rix and I failed to understand in our analysis of humans as apex predators. We correctly identified their predatory adaptations, their deceptive capabilities, their pain tolerance, their cooperative hunting methods, their temporal consciousness. But we fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their hunt. Humans aren't hunting our bodies, our territories, or even our resources. They're hunting our potential. They see other species not as competitors or prey in the traditional sense, but as unfinished versions of themselves, sentient beings who could become more than they are through human guidance. Their predatory drive isn't focused on domination for its own sake, but on a bizarre, almost parental compulsion to help other species transcend their evolutionary limitations. The ultimate evidence of this came during the recent Conclave of Species, where representatives from 317 sentient civilizations gathered to establish new protocols for galactic governance. When the human delegation was offered a position of special authority based on their contributions during the Helios crisis, their representative, Dr. Omar Bashir, declined. "We don't seek to lead the galactic community," he announced. "We seek to help build a community where leadership itself becomes collaborative rather than hierarchical." This statement was met with approval from species who, just decades earlier, would have found such concepts incomprehensibly alien to their biological hierarchical imperatives. The cognitive transformation is already so complete that many species now perceive traditional dominant structures as primitive and inefficient compared to human collaborative models. I find myself in the impossible position of warning against something that demonstrably improves conditions for most species, How can I argue against approaches that extend lifespans, increase resource availability, reduce conflict, and expand intellectual horizons? Yet beneath these benefits lies the undeniable reality. We are becoming more human with each passing cycle, adopting their thought patterns, their values, their perception of reality itself. Is this extinction? Not of our bodies, but of our unique evolutionary perspectives. Or is it transcendence, the next step in our own development, catalyzed by contact with a species that evolved along a fundamentally different path? I no longer know. The line between predation and partnership, between conquest and cooperation, has blurred beyond recognition. Perhaps this was inevitable, the natural outcome when intelligence itself becomes the primary evolutionary adaptation. As I conclude this final log, I must acknowledge my own transformation. I began these observations convinced humans represented an existential threat to galactic diversity. I now find myself questioning whether their approach might indeed represent the optimal evolutionary strategy for intelligence itself in an interconnected cosmos. Have I been infected by human thought patterns? Or have I simply grown wiser through exposure to a genuinely superior cognitive framework? The fact that I can no longer distinguish between these possibilities may be the most human thing about me.